Monday on G.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier. I'll be talking to this woman, the former boss of Channel 4 News. She now runs a Cambridge University college and thinks her female students should have seminars teaching them to remember to have kids. Also, Winston Churchill once forgot his lines during a speech, and Boris did the same this morning.
That you love.
He also went on to make car noises, as you heard, and reminisce about a visit to Peppa Pig World. We'll examine the case for ad-libbing with Brendan O'Neill. Queen is said to be upset with the BBC for producing a controversial documentary about William and Harry. It'll be broadcast in an hour. I'll be talking to Robin Aitken, a former BBC journalist, who says the corporation is institutionally biased. And you're looking at pictures of Wembley Stadium. It used to hold... That could be Wembley, but it's not, is it? Anyway, imagine what Wembley Stadium looks like. Used to hold 100,000 people. Hold that thought as I tell you that's how many British kids will be soon in care. Outspoken charity founder Nick Buckley joins me. And Tim Stanley, too, will take us through his column. There it is, some pictures that match the words, taking us through his column in The Telegraph today, which it actually doesn't mince its words. It begins, America has gone properly mad. All that is coming up, but first, a news update with Polly.
Good evening. Mourners have been paying their respects today to the murdered politician Sir David Amess. The father of five's coffin was draped in a Union flag and carried to his funeral by members of Southend Fire and Rescue Service. Sir David was stabbed to death while holding a surgery in Leigh-on-Sea in October. The Home Secretary says there's no silver bullet for solving the migrant crisis. Priti Patel took urgent questions from MPs in the Commons today over the increasing numbers of people crossing the Channel. The Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds accused her of empty rhetoric and broken promises. It was announced almost 3 times as many people have come to the UK this year than last year.
There's no single solution to fixing a global migration crisis. The Nationalising Borders Bill going through Parliament will actually make life harder for the criminal gangs behind these crossings, and all members should be supporting that. That means people smugglers could face a life behind bars, and importantly, this will break the deadly business models of these smugglers. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, of course, we want to make sure that the United Kingdom is less attractive to illegal migrants.
And the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, also today announcing the top lawyer who's been put in charge of the Sarah Everard murder inquiry. Dame Ailish Angiolini QC is to investigate her murder, which was by a serving police officer in March. The authorities hope she will shine a light on failings that led to Sarah's killing. In the United States, at least 5 people have died and more than 40 others were injured after a car ploughed into a Christmas parade. The suspected driver, 39-year-old Darrell Brooks, has been charged with intentional homicide. Police have confirmed the incident was not a terrorist attack. The victims are aged between 52 and 81. 6 children remain in a critical condition at a Wisconsin hospital.
18 kids were brought to our children's emergency department, ranging from ages 3 to 16 years of age, which include 3 sets of siblings. Injuries ranged from facial abrasions to broken bones to serious head injuries. 6 of these patients were sent to the operating room last night, and 2 additional patients are undergoing surgeries today.
Here in the UK, gender categories will be scrapped at the next Brit Awards. Gongs will be handed out instead for Artist of the Year and International Artist of the Year, replacing Best Female and Best Male categories. The show's organisers saying they want to focus on artists' work instead of how they identify. You're right up to date. I'm back in an hour. Now back to Colin Brazier.
Well, what's it like growing up without a family, to know that your parents weren't able or even willing to bring you up? In a developed country like ours, it's pretty much the toughest start that life can throw up. What's worse is that it's a painful reality for more and more young British kids. Today we learned that the number of British children projected to be in care by 2025, not far away, will likely exceed the 100,000 mark. If you're struggling to picture how many people it is, Wembley Stadium used to hold 100,000 spectators. It's a lot of folk, and the number keeps on rising. Well, one person with direct experience of seeing the impact of a childhood without parents is Nick Buckley. The homeless charity he founded often helped adults whose lives began as children in care. Nick, thanks so much for joining us this evening. 100,000 kids in care, goodness me.
It's a hell of a number, isn't it? I think it's an indictment on our childcare system, on what councils are doing to prevent young people and children entering the care system in the first place. We don't do prevention.
I can think of a handful of figures in public life, Nick. Maybe you can, maybe our viewers can think of their own heroes, in a sense, who've pulled themselves out of incredibly difficult beginnings in life. I saw him on telly today, actually. Andrew Pearce, the Daily Mail columnist, started in care. But by and large, the prospects for someone who starts in a care home are massively, massively limited.
Yeah, and we need to start by saying it's not the children's fault. You know, it's not their fault, the parents they were given. I need to also to say that social work is the toughest job I've ever come across. I've never been a social worker, but I've worked alongside him. I've seen him over 2 decades. I can only say it's the only job I've ever seen I wouldn't want to do, because there seems to be no solution sometimes. Now, you have children who go into the care system for a variety of reasons, some for a short amount of time, some for a long time. And their outcomes in life are absolutely terrible. There's reports out there. I've not read a report for about 2-3 years now, but the reports are still saying the same thing. If we leave a child with abusive parents who physically or sexually abuse that child, they do better in life if we leave them with those parents than take them into our care system.
Unbelievable.
That's how bad our care system is.
Nick, when you were dealing with homeless people, was it possible to say what proportion had been in care?
No, I would just be pulling a number out of the air.
Yeah, because, I mean, sometimes getting to the bottom of what their life stories entails, it's not the easiest thing in the world, is it? But we do know, don't we, however, that there is a shortage of people who are willing to become foster parents. It's not as if the number of kids going into care has suddenly rocketed. It is gently going up. But actually the bigger problem, in a sense, is the fact there is a real serious shortage of, and you can understand why, of people who want to be effective foster parents.
Yes. If you look at the increase in IVF treatment, so women who are infertile need help to get pregnant. If you look at the rate of that increasing over the last 2 decades, and you look at the decrease of children being adopted or fostered, the lines cross. There is a correlation between both of them. So 20, 30 years ago, if you was unfortunate enough not to be able to have your own children for whatever reasons, you would contemplate adoption, you would contemplate fostering. Now, your first choice is, let's have our own. It might cost us 3, 4, 5, 10 grand, but let's have our own. And people are doing that, which is great for them. And I'm not criticising people for that. But what we're doing is we're leaving our fellow citizens, our junior fellow citizens, in homes, in care homes.
And then forgetting about them, Nick. I mean, that's the other point in all this. And we think back to the succession of grooming scandals across parts of our country, and quite often the common denominator was that the victims either were in or had been in care.
I've worked with dozens of young people through my charity and when I worked for the council who are in care. I did work in children's homes as well at some point. So I've spoken to many children who are in care. And the thing that comes across most of all, and the thing they want most of all, is a thing they cannot have. And it's a hug off an adult. So I can't hug them. I'm not allowed to. The staff in the home looking after them, they can't hug them and give them a hug and tell them they're special. And they're brought up in a corporate environment where it's all about the money. These companies make fortunes running children's homes. And the thing those children need is to feel like a child and feel protected and be hugged and get a kiss. And I understand why we don't do that, but then we wonder why those children leave those homes and will do anything for anybody if they feel special and loved. There's a whole gap missing in their heart that a parent should have filled for them.
And Nick, one final thought. We mentioned social workers. For you, it's pretty much the worst job that people could do. There's no doubting it's a vital one.
Hardest job.
But the rates of churn, if you look at the number of people, lots of younger people who want to make a difference, God bless them, choose social work. Maybe not in the numbers that once did, but the rates of disillusionment and disenchantment, the speed with which people realise that actually what they want to do and what they can do are very different things.
Yes. If you're going to go into social work, you need to understand the number one aim of your job. The number one aim of your job as a social worker is to make sure when someone dies, the council can't be blamed. That's your number one aim in your whole job. So because of that, there's far too much box ticking, back slapping, covering each other's backs. You then can do some good work. And of course, social workers do good work as well. But the disillusionment is always because you have to follow procedures. And those procedures are there for a reason. But those procedures are not there, from my experience, for the benefit of the child. They're there for the benefit of the council.
Nick Buckley, sharing a perspective that's all yours, and we appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed. Not a story that lots of people are going to be leading their bulletins with today, but we thought it was important. So I hope you agree with us. Nick Buckley, our thanks to him. Even the best orators can lose their train of thought. As a young MP, Winston Churchill was halfway through a long speech in the House of Commons when his mind went blank. After standing for a few moments, literally lost for words, one of the greatest speech makers in British history sat down red-faced. It wasn't quite so bad for Boris Johnson today when he gave a speech to business leaders at the CBI's annual conference. At one stage, however, having lost his notes or found they weren't there, he spent 21 seconds unable to go on. He picked up with what seemed to be the first thing that came to mind, how he'd spent the day before at Peppa Pig World. He also peppered his speech with quotes from Lenin and imitations of a car engine. It was, all in all, some speech. These are the highlights.
Motoring correspondent, EVs may not burble like sucking doves, and they may not have that rum, rum, rah, rah that you love. Safer streets with great local schools, with fantastic broadband. Forgive me. And Tony, yesterday I went, as we all must, to Peppa Pig World. I don't know if you've been to Peppa Pig World. Who's been to? Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World. Not enough. it's fantastic. I was a bit hazy what I would find at Peppa Pig World, but I loved it. And Peppa Pig World is very much my kind of place. But the real lesson for me going to Peppa Pig World, and I'm surprised you haven't been there, was about the power of UK creativity. Who would have believed, Tony, that a pig that looks like a hairdryer, or possibly a sort of Picasso-like hairdryer, a pig that was rejected by the BBC, would now be exported to 180 countries with theme parks both in America and in China, as well as in the New Forest.
Does it matter that the PM seemingly hadn't prepared to address a room full of senior business leaders? This, after all, is the politician who've infamously said, F business. And in a world of polished and dull speeches, was it not a little bit refreshing perhaps to see someone veer spectacularly off script? Or was it, as Rachel Reeves, Labour's shadow chancellor, insisted, evidence of a truly shambolic operation at Number 10 and a truly shambolic Prime Minister working out of it? Joining me now, Brendan O'Neill, chief political writer at Spiked Online. Brendan, to say it was one thing or t'other is probably a bit too binary, but what did you make of it? Was it hopeless and damaging and embarrassing, or actually it doesn't matter very much?
I think it was hopeless. I think it might be a little bit damaging. I think the thing with Boris is that his dishevelled, kind of crumpled act is wearing a little bit thin. And I think what this speech today showed is that it might not be that much of an act at all. Maybe he is just a bit unprofessional. Maybe he is just a bit forgetful. So I think there's increasingly a thin line between his posture as an unspun politician, an honest politician who shoots from the hip. I think there's a thin line between that image that he puts out and the reality, which is that in this case, he forgot where he was, he mumbled, he didn't do a good performance in front of very important people. So I think it probably could be a little bit damaging, and I think it's getting a bit tiresome, Boris as the kind of dishevelled politician.
I mean, it's one thing to turn up to his local party association or, some sort of nickel and dime event, but there are probably, I don't know, half a dozen keynote speeches in the course of a political calendar year. I think one of them was last week, wasn't it? The Mansion House speech, obviously party conference, 2 or 3 others. But this would be one of them. It would be up there in the front rank of big occasions to make an important keynote speech. So I just wonder, therefore, whether it reflected something of his disdain for business. That's probably what he would like us to believe.
That may well be the spin they put on it, because, of course, one of the ironies of the Boris Johnson phenomenon is that he presents himself as very unspun, but that's quite a spin-doctored performance in itself. So they may well put the spin on it, well, it was just business leaders and he's the F-business guy, so he didn't really pay much attention. But the thing is, you're right, there are only a handful of speeches that really stand out for a prime minister over the course of the political year, and you do have to put some effort in. I felt a tiny bit sorry for him. I've done speeches, and you've done speeches, Colin, and it's my worst nightmare to forget where I am in a speech, and I write huge numbers on the top of each page so I don't lose my train of thought. So I did feel sorry for him, but as a PM, speaking to business leaders, he should have made more effort. I think one of the problems with Boris is that he's kind of taking for granted the fact that he's Prime Minister, that he was elected with a huge landslide in 2019. He forgets that many of those voters, especially the Red Wall voters, they lent him their vote. This was a temporary relationship, and they could easily take it away if he doesn't buck up his ideas and start improving his performance, I think.
It's a shame because, we were talking about Winston Churchill earlier. That was somebody, it was said of Winston Churchill, he mobilised the English language and he almost turned it into a sort of weapon of war. And Boris has it within him to write beautifully. We know that, don't we? We know he writes beautifully when he can be bothered. Just on the point about what stratagems you have, however, if your mind goes blank, as it sometimes does. Winston Churchill, I mentioned at the beginning there, famously stood up in Parliament, got halfway through his speech, and his mind went blank. And thereafter, he always made sure he had just a few words written down on a scrap of paper. And that came to mind because about 20 years ago, after a very long day of broadcasting, and it happens to lots of broadcasters from time to time, you're exhausted, your mind's fatigued, your sort of broadcasting biorhythms have hit a low. And I completely, out-of-body experience. And thereafter, I always made sure I had sort of, sheet of A4 paper quartered with just a couple of words. So there are ways around this. He just didn't even feel he needed them.
Yeah, there are ways around it, and it's very important for public speakers, especially someone like Boris Johnson, to learn those ways around it and to really internalize that kind of get out clause. If you fluff, or if you forget where you are, or you forget your lines, it's really important to do that. But I think you make an important point about disdain and the possibility that it was demonstrating disdain, even if it was unwitting, against business leaders. But I think the problem is lots of viewers will think that it's disdainful in general. If you're the Prime Minister of a country, you've been put into an incredibly important position by the people, you've been trusted by the people to run the country, you do have to make a great deal of effort. And I think that if Boris carries on with this kind of bumbling act, oh, I forgot this and I forgot that, and I'm a bit dim, even though I'm actually super clever, all those kinds of acts that he puts on, I think people will start to say, listen, we elected you to do a very serious job, so we wouldn't mind if you took it a bit more seriously. So people in number 10 should have a word with him, and I think they should be a bit more polished. The unspun stuff, I think, has had its time.
Brendan O'Neill. Brendan, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Colin.
After the break, why the BBC isn't necessarily wrong to broadcast a show in less than an hour from now that will damage the royal family, but is wrong to allow it to be presented by a journalist who said the monarchy ought to be abolished.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. At the end of this show at 9 o'clock, the BBC will commit an act of institutional self-harm. It will run a programme, the first of two, about how the royal brothers, William and Harry, fell out and briefed the media against each other. I have absolutely no idea whether the allegations contained within the programmes are true. I suspect they might be. I also think it's an interesting topic and worthy of journalistic scrutiny. The show is fronted by a presenter I admire, 38-year-old Amol Rajan, a former newspaper editor who, unlike many BBC employees, is neither posh nor predictable. When the Conservative philosopher and Brexiteer Roger Scruton died last year, Amol Rajan posted a warm eulogy. Not many folk at the BBC would do that. It's an organisation characterised by cognitive uniformity and groupthink. You can guess what most BBC staff think without going to the trouble of asking them. But in one regard, at least, Amol Rajan is philosophically aligned with his BBC colleagues. I have a strong suspicion that most of those working for the corporation would like to see the abolition of our royal family. As a former royal correspondent, I know for a fact that at least one erstwhile BBC royal watcher is a Republican. But the point is, they kept that to themselves. Amal Rajan, by contrast, has made no secret of his republicanism. When he was at The Independent, he wrote, "I'm a Republican because I'm a patriot. I love my country and want it to be a place where any boy or girl could grow up to be our head of state, not one where Charles Windsor is appointed by birthright." Asked about whether this disqualified Amal Rajan from fronting a two-part documentary containing serious allegations which have reportedly left the Queen upset, the BBC responded. This article predates Amal's work at the BBC. Once journalists join the BBC, they leave past views at the door. Sure they do. Well, that's a noble sentiment, but it won't wash. The appearance is what matters. I have no doubt Amal Rajan will present his show tonight responsibly. Had he not outed himself a few years ago as a Republican, he'd be the right man for the job. He was a former media editor at the BBC who has a deep understanding of what makes the industry tick. But this isn't about his qualifications or his acumen, it's about his suitability to host a programme that will do the monarchy lasting harm. To which some might say, so what? If we know where his sympathies lie. After all, surveys show about a fifth of us want our current sovereign to be the last one we have. Republicanism is not an extremist position, but it is a minority view. The vast bulk of Britons, myself included, disagree with Amal Rajan. We're patriots like him. We're meritocrats. We like the idea that any boy or girl can grow up to be the leader of our nation. They can become Prime Minister. But to be monarch is to preserve a golden thread of history. I don't think most of us see our hereditary sovereign as the apex of a social pyramid. Rather, they are the ultimate public servants. When I see the Queen or a future King Charles III, I see, and will see, the embodiment of a national history, a national story. I see someone prepared to give up their privacy for a life of duty and service. Britain is full of fantastically rich people, quite a few richer than the Queen, most of whom don't give a toss about the rest of us. The Crown makes the state into something flesh and blood. The royals are imperfect, just like the rest of us. And the squabbles between its members are part of that story. But Amal Rajan, openly Republican, is not the man to tell that story. Not while the BBC treats us not as equal citizens, but effectively as subjects. In a free society, we should be able to register our disapproval of the BBC's actions by taking our custom elsewhere. Under the licence fee, we can't, on pain of prosecution. Everyone who works for the BBC enjoys a sort of inherited privilege. They don't have to go out into the marketplace and compete for customers like we have to here. Ultimately, their livelihoods are guaranteed by law, just like the royals. Joining me now, the former journalist Robin Aitken, whose book Can We Trust the BBC draws on his decades of experience with the corporation. Robin, thanks so much for joining us. Will you be watching tonight?
Oh, yes. Yes, I've decided that I must watch this one because, of course, we don't really know what's going to be in it. We've only had various reports in the press about how the Queen is upset and what line Amal Rajan might be taking. But I think it's something I have to watch. And I fear that, rather as you've said in your introduction there, Colin, the BBC has once again strayed into treacherous waters with this one. We're in a situation, you see, where what happens at the BBC and the politics of the BBC and the supposed impartiality of the BBC is all now up for question. And whereas once upon a time, the polite fiction that the BBC operated under a blanket impartiality rule, that's been rumbled. And so we're in a situation now which is very different from where we were 10 or 20 years ago, when much of this would have passed without comment. Now the whole question is highly politicised, and the BBC is under great scrutiny. And that's why this question of Amal Rajan being a Republican is a bit of a hot potato now.
Would it matter, Robin, if he was a monarchist? I mean, would we have the same objection if he'd outed himself previously, as I'm able to do here, under different circumstances. We have a different business model, we have a different set of objectives. But when you are the national broadcaster, paid for with the help of a mandatory poll tax, the licence fee, I would suggest that puts a different obligation on people to be impartial. But, you know, republicanism is still, it's not an extremist position, far from it, but, you know, about a fifth of the country would view themselves that way. But would it matter if therefore the broadcaster involved here was a monarchist, coming from the majority view, or would that still be a problem?
Well, it would be better, wouldn't it, if we didn't know? I mean, and it would be better for the BBC if we weren't aware of someone like Rajan's political convictions. As you say, being a Republican is a perfectly respectable position. It's not one shared by a majority in the country, so it puts you in a minority position. And I have no problem with people taking a Republican view. I think they're quite mistaken in that view. I think that a constitutional monarchy is a very good solution to the problems of having a head of state. It depoliticizes, in a way, your head of state, which I think is a benefit to us all. And certainly when I was in the BBC, there was always an undercurrent of republicanism within the organisation. I was often struck by the hostility or the sort of mild contempt, I think would be a better way of expressing it. The sort of mild contempt which was the default position of many people in the BBC when it came to the monarchy. And I'm talking now about journalists, many of whom would have regarded the BBC as a sort of a relic of a bygone time, and they resented the privilege which they saw it as embodying.
And it's ironic, Robin, right? Sorry, Robin, I was going to say, it's so ironic, isn't it, what you're saying, given the context, which partly is that the BBC, as the national broadcaster, is endowed, is gifted, I would suggest, with these obligations and links to the royal family. Whether that's the Christmas message, televising, royal events. They have this privileged position, but as you say, they still hold it in disdain.
Yeah, and I think this is something which has changed quite a lot, actually, in the past 20 or 30 years. There was a time, certainly when I joined the BBC in the 1970s and through the 80s, there was a sort of cordon sanitaire around the royal family as far as the BBC was concerned. It was one of those areas that the BBC tended to leave to the press and the tabloid press especially to investigate, and it wasn't overeager itself to get in on the act. And that changed, and of course, what we saw with the Brazier scandal absolutely exemplifies the sort of problem that the BBC has with the royal family now. In the case of Brazier and the interview with Diana, the BBC was treating the royal family as just another story. It was fair game for the BBC, and they did this, they got the interview through very underhand and dishonest methods. Then there was this long cover-up. Now, it was only 6 months ago, Colin, that the BBC was offering grovelling apologies to William and Harry because of the Diana interview. The BBC was wearing sackcloth and ashes because of that great journalistic debacle, which it was. And now here we are 6 months later, and the BBC is onto this same territory again. It seems as if they've learnt nothing. You know, what will be the consequence of this programme this evening? Will it improve relationships between those two brothers? It's unlikely, isn't it? All it's going to do, it's going to stir things up again. It'll make the royal family uncomfortable. It's another way of just chipping away at the foundation stones. And, one day the BBC is going to wake up to the fact that this doesn't sit well with people. And as I said a moment ago, we're in a different ball game now. Every appointment the BBC makes is now under scrutiny for its political context. And this wasn't the case 10 or 20 years ago. The BBC has to tread very carefully because the government has little patience with it, and it owes the BBC nothing. And there are many of us who are now thoroughly disenchanted with the way the organisation conducts itself. And this sort of thing tonight, it does not endear itself to us.
Robin Aitken, really appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Now, as an enthusiast for parenting, I have 6 children, some of whom still talk to me. It pains me to say this, but having children is increasingly unfashionable. Over the weekend, the highly respected Pew Research Center in America published data which shows how quickly the tectonic plates of demography are moving, at least in developed countries like the US and the UK. Pew found that 44% of Americans aged between 18 and 49 who currently do not have kids never plan to have any. 3 years ago, when the same survey was published, the figure was just 37%. For something as profound as where the next generation is coming from, these are massive and unprecedented shifts in behaviour. Well, I say this by way of context ahead of my interview with a prominent public figure who believes that young women in particular need to stop burying their heads in the sand about the realities of fertility. They shouldn't forget to have children. Not such a controversial idea, you might think, but given she is the boss of a female-only college at Cambridge University, her remarks about this last month provoked a strong backlash. But she's unlikely to let criticism quiet her voice. As the boss of Channel 4 News for years, she was, as the cliché goes, no stranger to controversy. She is Dorothy Byrne, who joins me now. Dorothy Byrne, thanks so much for your time. Do appreciate it. What did you make of the reaction to what you had to say about this idea for seminars for your students? Were you braced for it? Was it more toxic, more voluminous than you expected, or was it a trickle?
Well, first of all, there was a lot of erroneous information given about what I have actually said. I've not held any seminars and I don't plan to hold seminars. What I have said and what I do is talk openly about these issues, because I think it's very important that older women talk to younger women about all sorts of issues that are going to affect them in their lives. I happen to know quite a lot about fertility issues because I've made a major series for television. I spent a year doing it, and for more than 20 years, I've worked with a charity which helps people to conceive. So I'm aware that a lot of young men and women don't have full information about fertility, and therefore it's important for me to talk about it. I also talk, by the way, about the menopause to men and women. I think we have to talk about all these things. I was a bit shocked, but then I realized that women have always been criticized when they talk about their own bodies and when they seek to have power over their own bodies.
And you frame it that way, I suppose, as a feminist question, don't you? And yet I imagine some of the criticism was coming from women who were saying you were, and from men, who would say that you were striking a position of social conservatism. I mean, I don't for a second agree with that, but you can see why they would say that.
Well, of course, I wasn't at all saying that you need to have a baby in order to be a happy person or live a fulfilled life. And I'm certainly not a social conservative, but I believe that knowledge is power. That's why I'm at a top Cambridge college. And it's important, if you were to have full control of your life, to know all the facts about yourself and your body. But I have also spoken out about some of the other key reasons, perhaps even more important, as to why women now struggle to have children. And a really important one is that so many women now are freelance and they have no maternity rights. And I feel very strongly that the government should start to be realistic about what work is like now, and ensure that proper maternity rights are not tied just to having a staff job. I know so many young women in television who say, I want to have a child, but I really worry that it will ruin my career, and I also don't have enough money to employ a nanny or pay for expensive nurseries, and I'm really at a loss. So I think we need to deal with those issues of childcare costs and maternity rights alongside ensuring women and men have more knowledge than many of them do have about fertility.
I mean, there you are, you've got some of the best brains in the country, Dorothy. I mean, there'll be some people listening to what you had to say about the sort of ignorance or lack of knowledge, and they'll say, well, come on, it's basic, it's GCSE biology to know the graph that says, you know, by 35, you almost get this reverse exponential effect, don't you? And it really does fall off a cliff, to borrow the old saying. They know this. Why do they need reminding of it?
Well, if only it was true that people did know this, and if only it was true that schools in this country taught people useful information. The number one thing not taught in this country at school, which should be taught, is how to cook properly for yourself. Then we wouldn't have all the problems with obesity. We are teaching young people a lot about contraception, but really very little about the practical information of fertility, and nothing at all in many schools about the menopause, which is another subject which will affect all women and the men they know at some point in their lives.
I'm glad you mentioned the men as part of this equation of this fertility window that seems to be getting narrower and narrower and narrower, partly for some of the reasons you've already given. But I have this conversation fairly regularly with my older daughters, that it's not just the fact that by the time, if you go to university and you've paid down some of your university debt, you've paid for the deposit on a flat or whatever it is, moved around a bit because the labour market demands such flexibility from you, and then you've got it all together maybe in your late 20s, and then, you know, have you got a partner that you feel is reliable enough? And that comes from a point about men, that it seems to me there's also a dearth of men who are willing to commit, and I'm not sure how you make them reframe that thinking.
I don't know that I agree with you that men are somehow less into commitment than they used to be. I'm not sure that I have the evidence that that's true. What I see among many young men is that they have the great sense of responsibility that young women do, which is they're worried, how can they have children? Because sadly, they haven't managed to buy a flat by their late 20s. And if everybody was irresponsible, you might argue that people would have more children earlier. But it's because young people are so responsible and feel that they want to be in the position to give their children a home, to look after them properly, that so many people are struggling to have children at the age that I think a lot of them might like to have children.
Yeah. I mean, there's another view, isn't there, which there's an argument that says get it out of the way earlier, but obviously to do that, to provide a stable home, to have children when you're, you know, biologically most apt to have them, probably in your having those late teens, early 20s, then who's going to have that stable domestic platform that's required for that to happen? It's not just about economics, though, is it? I mean, part of the Pew research that I mentioned earlier, there's a significant minority, and it's growing quite rapidly, of young people now who actually, it doesn't matter about the reasons I mentioned, the fertility window is closing. They just don't want kids. So the graphs are immaterial, and whether that's to do with perceived threats of climate change or lifestyle choices, there is a growing disdain towards the idea of becoming parents.
I think this is very interesting. Why is it that an increasing number of people don't want to have children? And I think, I mean, that's their choice. And I've always said you can be perfectly happy not having children. But I do think we should look at why an increasing number of people don't want to have children and really delve into it more deeply. Is this related to people's feeling that our planet is in deep trouble and a sense of pessimism about the future? I was brought up, you know, I was born in 1952, and we had the most incredible sense of hope about the future. our parents had survived the war, and my father survived Burma. And, he had the most incredible sense of hope about the future because he had survived. More and more of us went to university. It seemed like life was getting better and better. Now, for many, it seems like life is getting worse and worse. And I partly blame politicians because, we've seen, just you were discussing it earlier, they're a shambolic and dishonest lot and don't fill young people with great hope about the future.
Dorothy Burns, some really interesting views, and we appreciate you coming on to talk about this story. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
After the break, a bridge too far and a blow for those who wanted to knit the UK closer together. There will be no fixed link between Northern Ireland and the Scottish borders.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, Tim Stanley thinks America's gone mad. He should know. As an historian, he spent years writing about the US, its exceptionalism, its different way of doing things. In his column in The Telegraph today, Tim says the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse and the reaction to it amounts to a new high water mark of lunacy. Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old, was acquitted of murder after a jury agreed he was acting in self-defense after shooting dead two men in Kenosha, Wisconsin last year. Several media outlets called it a race killing, even though both victims, it's worth mentioning, were actually white. Tim Stanley joins me now to reflect. I wish people do this to me, Tim. Get me on the telly to reflect on the latest thing I'd written. Quite nice.
That's good, isn't it?
What was the point you were trying to get across?
I should probably reflect more before I write it. That's probably what I ought to do.
Your key point was that this really was a nadir for American culture and the political discourse that goes around it and the way the news is handled.
Yeah, first of all, because there's a sense that you have to take a side. To me, this story was a tragedy. The beginnings of it was a black man being shot by the police. Not a nice man. He was carrying a knife when he was shot, but by the by, a man was shot and left paralyzed by the police. Riots broke out. This young man turned up with his buddies and with guns to defend property, got involved in something that spiraled out of control and ended up killing two people and leaving one injured. If you stand back from it, you should be able to objectively say that this whole thing is a mess and a tragedy and points to a social sickness in society. We have it here in Britain. We have our own version of it, but America has it a great deal. But what frustrates me is that people felt they had to pick a side and that there had to be a narrative with that side. The narrative was either that Kyle Rittenhouse was completely innocent and was defending property like a good, patriotic American, Or the narrative was that this was all about race, that America is a fascist society, and that if Rittenhouse got off on the grounds of self-defense, that was proof that the judiciary system is inherently systemically racist. But as you have said, the 2 people killed and the 1 person left injured by Rittenhouse were white. This was not directly about race at all. So it's so frustrating that people cannot see the facts. They just immediately place over it the template of their narrative.
I mean, I know you weren't in your column, Tim, seeking to, juxtapose what was going on in the States with what was happening in the UK, though you say actually to a lesser degree it sometimes is. But I was reflecting today on the pictures from the funeral of Sir David Amess, and there was something of that in the wake of his killing. The sort of media, the mainstream media discourse for 48 hours and more was about toxic political rhetoric, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Not about what actually happened.
Yeah. And I contributed some of that myself because I felt this was an opportunity to reflect upon how politicians are mistreated by the public many times and not appreciated. But you're right, there was a strange conspiracy of silence not to discuss the nature of the killing or the potential motive. And it feels a bit like we've had that after the bombing, the attempted bombing of a Liverpool hospital as well. And there is this tension between the event, the official account of the event, and what people looking at it really think. And in the case of the Rittenhouse tragedy, you have the tragic event, you have what people think about it, and then you have the media circus around it. The media circus making lots of assumptions about what the public thinks. It's not just the media circus in America says this case was all about race. There is an underlying assumption that the public agrees, but that's quite possibly not true.
Does it tell us something about the nature of how journalism has changed over the past 20 years? That the idea of telling the story straight, here are the facts, you make up your mind, that's gone. It's been replaced by a kind of activism. I hear people screaming now, saying, well, that's what we do here. And I would say, no, it's not. And even if that were true, then it's absolutely part of a broader picture which involves, I was talking about the BBC earlier, where unquestionably parts of mainstream media in the UK have seen old-fashioned standards of journalism, which were dispassionate, about weighing evidence, about not taking a position, replaced by a kind of activism light.
Yeah, I do think that Britain is still better and the BBC is still better. There is still an emphasis upon laying out the facts and then allowing the interpretation to follow. By contrast, in America, there has been a demonstrable change in media culture, and it was caused by Trump. And it's both a sense that the liberal media must call something out, fact check something and stop it from happening again. That there was that if Trump could win in 2016, this has to be corrected. It was a mistake, and the media has a role to play in that. But there's also a very crude commercial calculation that there no longer is a national media, that you instead write for niche audiences and you give that audience what it wants. So to flick through the media responses after the Rittenhouse verdict was, again, gave the sense not just of living mentally in 2 different countries, but also that their facts were different in 2 different countries. That you could go to MSNBC, where Rittenhouse is presented straightforwardly as a militia type and a white supremacist. You can go to Fox News, where he is straightforwardly presented as a hero and a defender of property. It's extraordinary, but that is not just a moral calculation, it's a commercial calculation.
Interesting. You mentioned Fox News, actually, Tim. He's done an interview with Tucker Carlson at Fox. I think he did it yesterday, actually. Yeah. He said, Kyle Rittenhouse, that he supports Black Lives Matter. They probably weren't expecting that headline necessarily.
No.
Tim, so good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Tim Stanley, his column available on the Telegraph website, if you want to get to that. They are queuing up to kick the Prime Minister, as we've been saying today, what with his slightly unhinged speech this morning and plunging poll ratings this weekend. And today he's also copping flack for having to ditch one of his big ideas. For 3 years, the PM has been a cheerleader for a 20-mile-long fixed link between Larne in Ulster and Portpatrick in Dumfries and Galloway. But later this week, it is expected that Sir Peter Hendy, the chairman of Network Rail, will say that a bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland is not feasible, too expensive and technically too tricky, not least because of local weather conditions. For what it's worth, I think the PM should be applauded for trying to come up with a practical way of bringing the union of the UK's home nations closer together at a time when the centrifugal forces of devolution are putting the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom under some pressure. Joining me now, the political commentator Brian Monteith, to reflect on this. Brian, thanks for joining us. Good to see you as ever. There'll be no bridge.
Good evening. Yes, it would appear that it's a bridge too far. Well, of course, the truth is Boris Johnson appears to like bridges and big infrastructures as a statement. And I've no doubt that was one of the reasons he was attracted to having a bridge, or indeed a tunnel, between Northern Ireland and Scotland, because it would talk about the connectivity between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, bringing UK together. Now, there's a real problem in the UK because when you have borders that are imaginary but do exist in the minds of everyone and the minds of local authorities, parts of for instance, the road system actually are very poor, because as you get to those borders, somehow they become abandoned. So you have sections of the A1 and the M6 between Scotland and England, which suddenly move from motorway to dual carriageway, or in some cases, dual carriageway to single carriageway, because they're forgotten. And what essentially Boris Johnson is looking at is, how can we join up our country better? And this was one of the ideas. And although it was not always a non-starter, it was good that at least he was giving focus to how do we pull our country together more.
Yeah, and as that, for which I think he should be applauded. And it feels like, doesn't it? I mean, yes, there were headlines to be had from this grand projet, the idea of this huge bridge, but actually there were probably, as you mentioned, you know, the way the A1, I mean, I know there are plans to expand the A1, enlarge it and all the rest of it, but there is unquestionably a deterioration in the road network as you approach the Scottish border and beyond. And actually you wouldn't need to spend vast sums of money to improve that.
Well, of course, the other aspect of the bridge between Northern Ireland and Scotland was one of the original supporters was actually Mike Russell, that elder statesman of the SNP, who used to rabbit on about it. And here we have the SNP now saying, oh, it's a daft idea. Well, of course, they can't have it both ways. The truth is that the problem wasn't even so much the bridge, but the A75 between the English border in Dumfriesshire towards Stranraer and Cairnryan. So even if you did cross the Irish Sea, you'd suddenly find a snaking, slow single carriageway that takes hours. So it's not just about the big infrastructure, it's about the ancillary infrastructure that supports it. And this is what could be better done, and indeed is echoed by not doing HS2 so much, but actually doing more with the rail network itself. And I think that will pay bigger dividends.
We're going to leave it there. Brian, thanks ever so much. That's all for tonight. Up next, it's Dan Wootton. Stand by.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. High pressure is keeping things fine. During the next 24 hours for most of us, there'll be frost and fog, especially in the south on Tuesday morning, but replaced soon enough by sunny spells. Here's the area of high pressure. It's keeping Atlantic weather fronts and low pressure at bay for the time being, centred over Ireland, but around the periphery of that high, some additional cloud for northern and eastern parts of the UK. And you can see that across northern Scotland and increasingly Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England, seeing those patches of cloud overnight. More solid cloud coming into eastern England, perhaps floating into central southern England for a time. But away from the cloud, temperatures falling, a touch of frost, some fog patches to begin things on Tuesday. The fog gets replaced by sunny spells, and then for the vast majority it's another fine day. A lot of dry weather. Really the only noticeable rain will be across northern and western Scotland, where we keep those drizzly showers. But even the showers in Kent will tend to stay offshore, I think, throughout much of the day, so drier here. And for many it's bright, but I think there'll be areas of cloud floating about, so not entirely sunny. The best of the sunshine through these central and southwestern areas, temperatures reaching 10 Celsius. Into Tuesday evening, where we get those clear skies across southern parts of the country, with light winds as well. Some fairly dense fog patches will form. Could cause some problems on the roads first thing Wednesday. But away from the fog, areas of cloud here and there, and some more persistent rain arriving into Scotland, and by dawn, Northern Ireland as well. Now this weather front will sink south on Wednesday morning, so an hour or two of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. It then arrives into northern England and North Wales by lunchtime. To the north, brighter skies but blustery showers follow, and colder air digs south so that these showers will be falling as snow over the hills of Scotland. Thursday and Friday bring with them plenty more cold weather and increasingly unsettled weather.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here